this one is about restrictions and activity completion. So first off, we're going to cover adding restrictions on almost anything in Moodle, any activity, any resource, any block. You can add a restriction that requires a certain thing to happen before your students can see that element. So they can include activity completion. You must have activity completion enabled for that to work. A date, you can show until a certain date or from a certain date. So starting at a certain date or until a certain date. A grade on an assignment, a password, or user profile fields. So you can make it where only certain people can see it if they meet those qualifications on their user profile field. So let's look at where that is. So when you go into, I'm not going to pick an assignment because that one's the most obvious. I mean, like pretty much literally anything. They have restrict access down here. So that's where the restrictions happen, is in that restrict access block. And so if you add a restriction, it's going to make it where they can't see it. So activity completion, we're not going to look at yet because we haven't discussed activity completion yet, but date is probably one of the most common ones. So basically what this does is it makes it where you can see an activity from a certain date. So maybe starting Monday morning at 8 a.m. or until a certain date. So it will hide itself at a certain date or unhide itself at a certain date. That's pretty much all this is about. So you pick the date, you pick whether you want to do from or until. So if we do from, that means that it won't show right now. It will not show until tomorrow at midnight. Right. Now, this is also a feature that not everybody knows about. So if that little eyeball is open, that means that they can see that there is an activity. They see the name of the activity and they see the words, you cannot see this activity until August 11th at midnight. If this is hidden, if the eyeball is closed, they can't see it at all. They have no idea that it is there. That is the difference in those two things. It's going to look the same on your end because on your end, it's going to show you that it's available until this date, right? I mean, and it's a tiny bit different, but it's roughly the same.
So when we had something, the grade disappears from the grade book, will that happen with this?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. The grade will follow those restrictions as well. If you have something that you don't want your students to see anymore, but you want them to be able to see the grade, what you need is a hidden section. So if you have a section that is hidden, the students can't see that. But if they have stuff in there, let's say it is this lesson. They cannot see that, nor can they see the grade for that. But if you make it available, they still can't see it, but then they can see the grade for it. So that hidden but available allows it to still show up in the grade book. If it's hidden, then they cannot see the grade for it as well. So if you are trying to hide an entire week or something and you go and you hide that week, make sure that you go to the individual items and make them available if they have grades that you want your students to see. Because that absolutely will hide the grades as well. The great thing about this restrictions thing is you can also do entire topics. I can do this whole section restricted. I can make that whole section show up on a certain date or go hidden at a certain date. But the way that most of us don't really think about using it is you can also make it where they have to complete an assignment before they can move on to the next assignment. So a couple of different ways that you might use this would be like a lesson. They have to read the lesson before completing the quiz over the lesson. Because how many students just go straight into the quiz without ever reading the content? And that's so frustrating, especially if you're spending a lot of time making this content. I mean, God forbid you spend a ton of time making some interactive thing and then nobody looks at it and just goes and answers the questions, right? Student agreement form. This is one that some instructors have started doing. I think Aja does this. They cannot see anything else in the course until they complete that student agreement form. So that's pretty neat. Right. This is something that Courtney Clements did and was the first person I ever saw do it when she taught online. She made them take the quiz before they could see her stuff because it was a lit class. They were supposed to read it on their own before they came to class, right? So she made them take the quiz to show that they had read it before she showed them the PowerPoint where she told them all the answers, right? Oh, a little backwards from the way some of us do it, but it makes sense. And then mostly I mean, you cannot make it where if you accept late work, they have to complete 1 week's work before they can move on to the next week's work, that sort of thing, right? Make them do things in order. This can be especially useful in math classes where that content builds. And if they haven't completed this, there's no way they're going to be able to continue on to the next thing, right? So all of that is done in that same spot in that restrict access thing. So if you do grade, you can choose whether they have to have, this can be kind of like the lesson where you have that if they do really well on something, they see one thing. If they do really poorly, they see another thing. And so you can have it where if they get below a 50, they can see this thing because they probably need the extra content, right? Or you can make it where a lot of people do this one with the student agreement form. If you made it for a grade, right? They have to get the 100 on it before they can continue on with the rest of the content in the class. And you can do this with individual items or whole blocks of content. It's pretty useful. But another good one to be able to do it with is the activity completion. So you can choose whether they see it if the activity is marked complete, not marked complete, completed with a passing grade, or completed with a fail grade. If you don't have activity completion turned on in your course, this is going to confuse the heck out of Moodle. So if you use this, make sure you have activity completion turned on. So that leads to the second half of the presentation. What is activity completion? So in your class, on this main page, you can go to edit settings. And this is the settings for the class as a whole, right? This is not a page many of you go to or have need to go to very often, but it's that main cog there at the top of the page, edit settings. And so this is where you can change the short name of your class, which is the name that shows up right there. You can change the course start date and end date, although we usually try and have them set with when the semester starts and ends, so maybe don't mess with those. You can change the description of the course. This is where you can add those cool course images. Anybody notice that my dashboard looks better than yours? No, no, look at that. Beautiful. Instead of this mess. What's that about? But this is where you also can set up completion tracking. So this has to be enabled in order for that to work. I actually have it off on most of my courses, but it has some really cool features. So the way that you can tell if this is on or this is off is whether or not you have little check marks, check boxes out here. So if you look at this course, there are little check boxes. If you look at this course, there are no little check boxes. That's how you know if you have activity completion turned on or turned off. Your students will also see those check boxes. And when they complete an assignment, it will be checked. So with activity completion, some activities, it's more obvious than others, right? With an assignment, that activity is complete when they submit the assignment. Cool, understood. But some things are a little bit more complicated, like a book. When is that complete? How do you know that that's complete? So you have a couple of different options with activity completion. It's going to be, most of them are going to be set to do not indicate activity completion. So even though activity completion is turned on in this course, this particular activity has it turned off. So it's not going to have its little checkbox. You're not going to know who has completed this assignment. Students can manually mark the activity as completed. If you choose this one, your students get to decide when they have completed that activity, when they feel like they read that book thoroughly enough that they get to check that bad boy, right? If you want to give them that autonomy, that is perfectly fine. Although I have found that it just confuses the mess out of them because they go, I did that. Why didn't it check? Because you got to check it. Most of the time you're going to do show activity as complete when conditions are met. Now, if it is an activity where they don't submit anything, this is all you're going to see. Student must view this activity to complete it. That's the only option. They click on it, it's complete, right? But on other activities where they actually have to submit something or maybe get a grade for it, you have more options. So you still have student must view this activity to complete it, but you also can have student must receive a grade to complete this activity. Not only that, you could make them have a passing grade to complete the activity, or if you have multiple attempts set up, they have to have taken it multiple times and completed all of the attempts, right? And you can also check both of those. Doesn't have to be one or the other. I mean, although this doesn't really make sense because obviously if they got a grade, they looked at it, but you know, whatever. You can also enable due dates through this. And so it will show them those due dates in multiple places, right? But it also means if you make any changes to assignments and due dates, you have to change due dates in multiple places. So sometimes that's more of a hassle than a help. So where is all of that information stored? You have to have the completion progress box. So we have all these boxes that we add over to this side of Moodle. You notice lots of Moodle pages have boxes over there. To get to those, you have to have your editing on and then go over here in this navigation drawer. And it's the very bottom thing. And so for this one, we want completion progress. Where's my completion progress box? Apparently I'm too zoomed in on this screen. So this is the completion progress box. So it's going to show me all of my students and who has completed things and who's not completed things. So we have only one student who has completed anything in this class because I got on and completed stuff for her. Right? So when it's completed, it's green. The red ones mean that it's not completed and it's already been due. So if you have those due dates set up, it's going to turn red when they pass that due date. If it's blue, that means you don't have a due date set up in that activity completion section. It still means they haven't done it, but it's not counted as late yet.
So they haven't clicked on it at all, is what it's saying basically at that point.
Yeah.
Basically.
Well, not necessarily. They could have clicked on it. Like if it was a quiz, they could have clicked on it, but they didn't take it. It just means that it's not late yet. The students also see this and they'll see, you know, the percentage of work that they have done. And as the semester progresses, these boxes just get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And there's tons of little things that you can look at and just kind of get a very visual view of how they're doing, right? It's going to tell you the last date they were in your class and then what they've done while they were there. But notice that in this class, I have a ton of assignments, but I only have 7 things there, right? So you have to have that activity completion turned on in those assignments in order for it to show you that stuff. Another thing about the activity completion, you notice that these boxes are these little broken lines, and then this box is the whole line. That's what it looks like when they have to click it themselves. If it's something that should happen automatically, Moodle turns their grade in, turns their check in, it's going to be the broken line. If it's something they have to click themselves, it's going to be the whole line. So if you look at it and you see the whole line and you did not mean to have them check their own thing, that means you clicked the wrong thing. Once that activity completion is turned on, then in those restrictions, you can make it where they have to complete this activity before they can move on to this activity. Without that activity completion turned on, you can do it based on a grade, but you can't do it on ungraded assignments. So things like books, you can have it where they have to look at that book before they can take that quiz, right? They have to look at that file or that folder before they can take that quiz. Right? You can't do that without activity completion turned on. It will also just give you a real basic view of who even looked at that crap. I mean, you can just glance at it and go, okay, this is the, whatever that says right there is the one that you're over at that moment in time. See how it's changing? Assignment, quiz, book, chat, database, file, accordion.
And what's it saying, like not?
It's just showing you what the name of that assignment is, so you know which one you're looking at there. So if you're trying to check how many people have looked at the accordion, or let's say this one, whatever this is, the file, you can just glance at that one and see that only 1 of 4 has looked at it. The more students you have, the more assignments you have, the more useful this data is. So I got Janet to put as many fake students in there as she could, just so you could see something, because without it, it was a little bit useless. But that's pretty much activity completion. Yeah, that's pretty much it. With the restrictions, you can also do what they call a restriction set. And this can get very complicated if you would like. And it's nested logic. So basically they have to meet this date, and they have to have this phone number, and they have to have gotten at least a 90 in the whole class, right? So, I mean, you can stack those. It doesn't have to be just one thing. So like if they have to have completed multiple things to get to the midterm, maybe you can have multiple restrictions set up. So they have to do every single one of those things before they can access that assignment. And you can also make it must not match the following. Doesn't have to be must. Be must not if there's some reason. Like if you're just trying to hide it from one student in particular, you can do must not, and then make this must not be named. Let's see. Joey cannot see this. I mean, not that you should necessarily just hide things from Joey, but sometimes reasons, right? Nobody knows what happens in your classroom but you, right? That's not true. We can tell every time you do this script. But any questions about this and how you might use it and why you might use it? And For that, you probably want to use the question and answer forum. So the question and answer forum is a little bit different than the other ones, and I actually have one in here. Because from the student view, they're not going to see anything until there is an answer on there. So actually the thing that makes this odd is you have to go in as the instructor and add that post that is the question. So let's say your form question is, you know, I don't know what kind of form questions you might will not want them to let other people's answers influence them on. Yeah. Yeah, there we go. So then when they go to answer that, they will not be able to see anything but that until they post their reply. Now, if they're very smart, they can post, you know, yes. And that is enough to open up the thing, but you will be able to see that they did that. And, you know, probably figure out what happened there. So. But I don't think that, because the restriction had, it's the whole activity. It can't just hide part of the activity. So I don't think that would work for that. But it's also not going to be the traditional form of a forum, in that you won't have multiple threads. It'll all be in that one thread when you do the question and a forum. Question and a. Yeah, it layers it. Like if someone replies to this one, it'll be over here. And then if they go back and reply to that one, it'll be lined up with that. But you have to post that initial post or it doesn't work.
Basically just copy and paste the directions. Put it on the first page, then copy and paste that into the question.
Yeah. You just have to remember to do it, because it's not something that'll copy over if you copy the class. It's something you'll have to do each semester. So if you have a lot of forums, that can be, you know, tricky. Every once in a while, you'll get that email going, I can't respond to this forum. And you're like, oh crap, I forgot to do the thing. So, anything else? All right, well, then that's all I got.